I had to move in with strangers at 76 because rent said so. I never thought I'd be sharing a refrigerator with strangers at 76. Never imagined labeling my milk with a marker so no one else would drink it. Never pictured myself sleeping behind a thin wall while two younger people argued on the other side, or tiptoeing in socks so I wouldn't disturb someone else's schedule in a house that wasn't mine. But here I am. Or rather, here I landed, because rent said so. You see, I didn't blow my money. I didn't live some wild, reckless life. I worked, I saved, I paid off debts. I bought gifts for my grandkids on birthdays, brought a casserole to every church, potluck, clipped coupons when it was still something people did. I did what I was supposed to do. But the truth is, life doesn't always care how carefully you played the game. Things change, rent creeps up, medications cost more, groceries don't go as far, and before you know it, the budget that once worked just fine is gasping for air. I remember sitting in my little one-bedroom place looking at the lease renewal and feeling my chest tighten. I ran the numbers 5 times hoping the math would suddenly shift. It didn't. I could either stay and drown or leave and breathe. But leaving meant facing a reality I wasn't ready for. It meant packing up the pieces of a life I'd built on my own and asking the world for room. Not metaphorically, literally. I had to find a room in someone else's house, not because I wanted community, not because I craved connection, but because I couldn't afford solitude anymore. That first night, lying on a borrowed bed under someone else's ceiling fan, I stared at the wall and wondered how I got here. I wasn't ashamed of needing help, but I was angry that needing help came without dignity. I missed the sound of my own clock ticking. I missed brushing my teeth without worrying if someone else was waiting for the sink. I missed walking barefoot to the kitchen in the middle of the night just because I could. But slowly, quietly, something began to shift. This story isn't just about financial hardship. It's about pride, about space, about independence and the quiet grief of losing it. But it's also about grace, unexpected grace, and the people we meet when life strips us down to our most vulnerable. You might think this is a story of loss, but it's also a story of what we find when we lose everything we thought we needed. Let me tell you what really happened after the rent said no, and I said, okay, then where do I go now? The moment I gave up the keys to my apartment felt like closing a chapter I wasn't finished reading. My fingers lingered on the cool metal before I slid them across the front desk. I smiled at the building manager, but I don't think it reached my eyes. That little one-bedroom had been mine for 11 years. It wasn't fancy. The wallpaper peeled in one corner, the oven leaned slightly to the left, but it was mine. I could hang pictures where I pleased. I knew which floorboard creaked and which window caught the morning sun just right. Leaving it wasn't just moving, it was unrooting. It had started with little warnings. The gas bill was higher than expected. The grocery bill stretched further every month. A few surprise medical copays showed up in the mailbox. But the breaking point came with a lease renewal that jumped by $430. That's a big number when you're on a fixed income. A crushing one, actually. I thought about asking for help from my daughter, but she's got her own kids now. I raised her to stand on her own feet. I couldn't bring myself to lean on hers. I even considered applying for subsidized housing, but the waiting list was over 2 years long in my area. 2 years. I didn't have 2 months. I swallowed my pride and started looking for a room to rent. Not an apartment, just a room. I scrolled through online listings that felt like a foreign world. Rooms above garages, shared spaces with house rules typed in all caps, photos of bunk beds and paper-thin doors. Eventually, I found one. A couple in their 40s had a spare bedroom. Quiet home, the ad said. Must be clean and respectful. I rehearsed what I'd say before I called. I didn't want to sound desperate. I wanted to sound capable, temporary even, like I was doing them a favor, not the other way around. I moved in on a Wednesday. The room smelled like lavender and old wood. The walls were bare. There was a desk in the corner and a lamp that flickered if you tapped it wrong. The couple gave me the Wi-Fi password and a shelf in the fridge. I thanked them. I kept thanking them. I didn't know what else to do. That first week, I lived in whispers. I timed my showers so I wouldn't overlap with theirs. I ate small, quiet meals. I stacked my shoes in a perfect row by the door. I didn't want to be in the way. I didn't want to be noticed. I wanted to take up as little space as possible. It's a strange thing going from being the head of your own home to a guest in someone else's. You don't just lose space, you lose rhythm. I no longer chose the temperature of the living room. I couldn't leave dishes in the sink overnight. I couldn't hum when I cooked or turn on the radio without wondering if it was too loud. People talk a lot about independence when you're young, how important it is to get your own place, carve out your own life. But they don't talk about how deeply you can grieve that independence when you lose it at 76. I didn't cry when I moved in, but I did sit on the edge of that bed one night holding a mug of tea and whispered to no one, "I miss my life." I said it not as a complaint, but as a confession, because I did. I missed my life. And the worst part was knowing I'd probably never get it back. But there's a strange kind of courage that grows in unfamiliar places, and I was about to find out just how much room I still had, to change, to adjust, to survive. People think sharing a house is just about space. They think the hard part is the fridge or the bathroom or remembering which shelf is yours. But it's more than that. It's identity. It's presence. It's the silent calculations you make 100 times a day about whether you're allowed to just be yourself. When I first moved in, I treated every shared moment like a test. If I was in the kitchen and one of them walked in, I'd wrap up quickly and get out of the way. I didn't want to seem like I was taking over anything. I folded my laundry in my room. I listened to music through headphones. I kept my toothbrush in a travel case, tucked away in a drawer. I didn't want to leave a trace, but you can only disappear for so long before it starts to wear you down. The hardest part wasn't the lack of space. It was the quiet. Not the good kind of quiet, the thoughtful, peaceful quiet. No, this was the kind that makes your chest feel heavy. The kind where you're afraid to speak too loudly, laugh too freely, exist too fully. I began to wonder if I was slowly becoming a ghost in my own life. One evening, I heard laughter coming from the living room. The couple was watching a comedy show. For a moment, I stood at my door, hand resting on the knob, tempted to walk out and join them. But I didn't. I turned around and sat on my bed. I didn't want to intrude, or worse, make things awkward. That's the emotional math of shared living when you're the outsider, always calculating how much space you're allowed to take up. And the less you take up, the more you begin to vanish, even to yourself. But then something unexpected happened. One morning, the woman of the house knocked softly and asked if I wanted a cup of coffee. I blinked, surprised. I nodded. We drank together in quiet. Not the heavy kind, the kind that's just comfortable. It was a start. There were still hard moments. I once accidentally used her almond milk instead of mine. I apologized. She laughed. "You don't need to ask permission to breathe, you know." That stuck with me. I'd been doing exactly that, asking permission to breathe. Over time, I started reclaiming little pieces of myself. I left a book in the living room. I put a small photo of my late wife on my desk. I even baked banana bread one afternoon and left a note, "Help yourself." They did. There were still misunderstandings, of course, that's part of sharing space. But I realized something important. Being in someone else's home doesn't mean you have to vanish inside it. You can be courteous and still visible. You can be humble and still whole. Dignity isn't just about privacy or square footage. It's about being allowed to exist without apology. And slowly, I stopped apologizing. Not loudly, not with arrogance, but quietly. With every deep breath I allowed myself. With every story I shared at the dinner table. With every morning I opened my door without hesitation. It didn't mean I stopped grieving what I lost, but it did mean I started building something new. You don't move in with strangers expecting to find connection. You hope for peace, maybe tolerance. You cross your fingers for cleanliness and decency. But friendship, that's not on the list. Especially not when you're 76 and walking into a house that already has its own rhythm, its own jokes, its own toothpaste in the bathroom cup. But humanity has a way of showing up where we least expect it. I don't know exactly when things began to change. It wasn't a big moment, no teary-eyed bonding or heart-to-hearts over wine. It was smaller than that. A dish left out for me. A text message. "We're ordering Chinese. One in." A laugh from the other room when I made a corny joke I didn't think anyone heard. The couple I lived with started asking about my day. At first I gave short answers, half out of habit, half because I didn't think they really wanted to know. But one evening, as we all sat in the living room, the man, Jason, asked me what I used to do before retirement. I told him about my years in logistics, my oddball coworkers, the satisfaction of solving problems with a clipboard and a phone. He listened, really listened. So did his wife, Kara. And when I finished talking, there wasn't that awkward silence that sometimes comes when younger people humor an old man. There was engagement. They asked more, and I found myself sharing and enjoying it. It was the first time in months I felt like I wasn't just occupying space, I was part of it. There were other moments too. Kara's mother got sick, and she came home one day with tears in her eyes. She sat at the kitchen table and I poured her some tea without saying anything. She looked at me like she hadn't expected comfort from me, but she accepted it. Later that night she said, "It helps, knowing someone's lived through this before." And Jason, he started leaving articles printed out for me. Things he thought I'd enjoy. One was about men who took up painting late in life. Another was about senior veterans who formed music groups. At first I thought he was just being polite. But no, he was seeing me. Not as a tenant, not as a retiree, as a person. And little by little, I started seeing them too. Not just as the people who had a room to rent, but as complicated, struggling, kind, impatient, thoughtful human beings. People with fears and hopes just like me. I started realizing something I hadn't dared believe in those early weeks of tight smiles and hushed footsteps. That this living arrangement, awkward as it had once felt, had become something else. Not quite family, but something close to chosen community. I still missed my space. I still dreamed about a quiet kitchen and my own front porch. But I began to understand that home isn't always a location. It's a condition, a feeling, a connection. Sometimes it lives in the people who offer you a chair when you're too proud to ask. Sometimes it's in a pot of shared coffee or a hallway conversation that lasts a little longer than it needs to. I didn't expect to find any of that, but I did. Not because I was lucky, but because I stayed long enough for grace to find me, in the place I least wanted to be. And maybe that's the strangest gift life gives you in old age. The chance to start over, even when you don't want to, and to find once again that humanity still has room for you. I used to think starting over was something you only did when you were young, when you had time and energy and backup plans. But I was wrong. Starting over doesn't care how old you are. It doesn't check your knees or your memory or your savings. It just shows up, uninvited, and waits to see what you'll do. I didn't want to move in with strangers. I didn't want to ask for less, live with less, accept less. I didn't want to give up my space, my quiet, my habits. But life doesn't ask what you want. It asks what you'll do when the ground shifts. And I'll be honest, for a while, I didn't think I could handle it. I thought this move was the final proof that I had failed at something, that maybe I hadn't planned well enough, saved enough, been enough. But that's not the truth. The truth is that rent rises and life surprises, and sometimes the only thing we have control over is how gently we hold ourselves in the storm. And maybe that's the real story here. Not about poverty or pride or square footage, but about dignity. About how we carry it even when we're boxed into corners, even when the lights are fluorescent and the walls are thin. I'm not the same man I was when I handed over those apartment keys. In some ways, I'm smaller, fewer belongings, less space. But in other ways, I'm more open, more grateful, more connected, more aware that the people we meet in the detours of life might be the ones who change us the most. So, if you're out there, older, tired, wondering how you got here, know this: you are not broken. You are not a burden. You are not finished. You are adjusting, adapting, expanding into new, unplanned corners of your life. And maybe, just maybe, The next chapter won't look like what you imagined, but it might turn out to be more human, more honest, and more beautiful than the one you left behind. You're still here, and that means the story isn't over yet.